Imagine yourself standing somewhere on an 11,000-acre ranch in the middle of the night, all alone in the dark. I guess you know it's dark because it's the middle of the night. But you don't know where your tent is. This is the situation in which I found myself a couple of summers ago when my daughter Brett and I attended the Oregon Eclipse Festival. It's been estimated that there were somewhere between 30,000 and 70,000 people camped out there with us. Averaging 3 people per tent, camper, or motorhome, that meant there were somewhere between 10,000 and 23,000 campsites for me to wade through in the dark, in the cold. The layout of the festival grounds covered about 300 acres, so it's not quite as daunting as 11,000. That's comparable, though, to 300 football fields, all put together. The campsites fanned out from the staging and common areas, spiderweb style, kind of similar to our sanctuary here. Each strand of the spiderweb was a dirt road leading from one destination to another. In between all those strands were the campsites. You are the campers. The roads were not as well delineated on the outskirts of it all, where you found the overflow camping. The campsites were scattered and squeezed together, all cattywampus. And that's where Brett and I were camped. On the last day of the event, I was determined to take in every sight and sound, I will get it, of this grand adventure. Until at some point, in the dead of night, I hit that wall that says, "You're not 20 anymore." You know that wall. My wonderful daughter put me in a pedicab, one of those bike taxis. She paid the driver, gave him a little bit extra to haul her poor, weary mother back to the line of the spider web where my tent awaited, and my nice warm sleeping bag. But when I hopped out of the pedicab, things didn't look right. The driver assured me I was where I was supposed to be, so I set off on foot to traverse the remaining stretch home. It didn't take me long to realize I was not on the right course. There, in the dark of night, with only my headlamp to guide me, nothing seemed familiar. There were none of the campsites I normally passed. In fact, as I kept walking, I realized there were no tents or campers or motorhomes, period. It was at that point that the batteries in my headlamp began to slowly fade into oblivion. I can see you're right there with me. Thank you for that, belatedly. What I could see was that I was surrounded by sagebrush and tall grasses, and somewhere I knew, in the grand scheme of desert and dark and quickly dropping temperatures, the music festival still raged on somewhere in the distance. And somewhere there was my tent. As my frustration and fear mounted, what I didn't realize is that I was just forging ahead blindly in the dark. I wasn't paying attention to the signs that were right there, signs which could lead me back to safety. A sense of hopeless resignation hit me, along with one pervading thought: I'm gonna die. The coyotes and crows are going to pick my bones clean, and Brett's going to be left wondering, where is my mother? That's a truly slap yourself in the face moment that jars you back into focus. It was time to stop meandering and reassess, because the music, which seemed to beat with the pulse of the earth, was no longer filling me, surrounding me as it once had. It was more directional, and it was coming from behind me. As I turned towards the music, I finally saw there was light. Lights from the staging areas created a glow all around the night's activities, and the lasers that were flashing up towards the heavens, beckoned me back out of the darkness towards safety. You probably all know what it's like to be in a dark place without access to light, at least until you flip the breaker switch or light a candle or grab a flashlight. You probably also know what it's like to feel bits of despair creeping into your soul, to think that whether physically or metaphorically, the darkness will envelop you. We live in a world in which the darkness often permeates our days. More than a solar eclipse, more than a power outage, we see and hear things that leave us wondering if there really is any more hope. You may have felt that this week. Jesus lived in a world where darkness often threatened to prevail. If you think being lost at night somewhere on an 11,000-acre ranch is intimidating, consider living during the height of the Roman Empire. It was a time of the powerful subjugating everyone else, a time of fear and helplessness, when hopelessness could grow and spread easily. While Jesus lived during the time known as Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, where law and order and security within the empire were guaranteed, the truth was that law, order, and security were not guaranteed for anyone except the Romans. A decade or so before Jesus' birth, the altar of Augustan peace was built and dedicated to honor the Emperor Augustus. It contained a religious mural depicting the imperial family and a frieze portraying various Roman values: peace, harmony, duty, decency, and wealth. That wealth was used for some good purposes. For Rome, anyway. Grain stores, roads, and waterways were repaired. In an effort to rebuild moral values, decaying temples were rebuilt. The seas were cleared of pirates, enabling the expansion of trade. But the ever-expanding empire and army took a huge toll on the empire's limited treasury. Absolute loyalty was demanded, and each of the soldiers who served Augustus was required to swear an oath to support and protect the emperor. Not to support and protect the people, but to support and protect the emperor. And to safeguard himself and prevent his own Ides of March, Augustus created his own bodyguard, the Praetorian Guard. He also reduced the size of the Senate, only keeping those senators who were of higher birth and greater wealth. Only those in power had any say with regards to politics and the ruling of the land. Any dissent or riots were quickly quelled. Calgacus, a Briton leader in what is now Scotland, warned his people, "Today, the boundary of Britain is exposed. Beyond us lies no nation, nothing but waves and rocks and Romans. More deadly still, for you find in them an arrogance which no reasonable submission can elude." Calgacus continued, "They are unique in being as violently tempted to attack the poor as the wealthy. Robbery, butchery, rape, the liars call empire. They create desolation and call it peace." And in the midst of the tyranny, in a time in which the wealthiest and most powerful prevailed and the regular folks were stripped of rights and resources, Jesus told his followers to be the salt and the light of the world. If you see any similarities between the time of the Roman Empire and now, you are certainly not alone. If you see the powerful and the elite taking control and the regular folks being stripped of their voices, their rights, the resources necessary to preserve life itself, you're not alone. If you see all these similarities and wonder and worry about the future for our children, you're not alone. If you ever feel fear or helplessness or hopelessness, know that these are feelings that Jesus understood well. He was born into a time and a people who knew and lived that reality day after day, year after year. And still, he told his followers to be the salt that preserves all that is pure and good and makes popcorn so yummy. He told them to be the light that shines in the darkness so that all might see and know God's goodness and grace. Jesus calls us to be and do the same. He calls us to preserve all that is holy and good in our world. He calls us to restore hope as we shine the light into the darkest corners around us and remind everyone that God's love is meant for them, for all of us. Jesus calls us to remember that whoever breaks one of the least of God's commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For those of you who are concerned, let me reassure you that the darkness did not swallow me on that night during the eclipse festival, nor did I become coyote and crow food, because the light shining in the darkness was my saving grace. May we know that despite the darkness that may grab at our people and our hearts, all is not lost. Even when we fear the darkness, feel its hold on us, all is not lost. We just need to stop and reassess and notice what's within us and around us. Because we carry God's light and love within us. We are the beacons of God's hope and light, grace and love. But just in case, be sure to pack extra batteries.